Everyone prepares you for the physical part of getting older, the joints, the metabolism, the reading glasses you swore you'd never need. What almost nobody prepares you for is a specific cognitive event, a moment when time itself stops registering as an open, essentially infinite resource and starts registering as something with a visible edge to it. This isn't a gradual fade. Research on adult development suggests it tends to arrive as something closer to a threshold, often somewhere between the mid-30s and mid-40s, and once it's crossed, it changes how nearly everything downstream of it looks. Here's the psychological mechanism worth understanding first, because it reframes what's actually happening, and it isn't really about turning a particular number. Psychologist Laura Carstensen's socioemotional selectivity theory, developed across decades of research, makes a claim that runs counter to the intuitive assumption that motivation and priorities are driven mainly by age itself. Carstensen's research argues the real driver is perceived time horizon, how much future a person feels they have left, rather than chronological age directly. When time feels expansive and open-ended, the kind of horizon most people carry through their 20s and early 30s, motivation tends to orient toward information gathering, novelty, expanding social networks, and long-horizon goals, the sort of investments that pay off broadly later. When time horizon feels limited, whether because of advancing age or because of a specific event, illness, loss, that shortens the felt horizon regardless of actual age, motivation shifts measurably toward emotionally meaningful goals in the present, deepening existing close relationships rather than expanding new ones, prioritizing present emotional experience over future-oriented accumulation. Carstensen's research, including experience sampling studies tracking people's actual emotional states over more than a decade, found that this shift is associated with something that runs against a lot of cultural assumptions about aging. Emotional experience, on average, tends to improve, not decline, as this shift takes hold. People report more positive and less volatile emotional states, even as time horizon narrows. The theory's core claim is specific and important. This isn't decline, it's recalibration, a reallocation of finite attention toward what actually pays off given a shorter runway, and by several measures, it functions as an upgrade to emotional regulation, not a symptom of loss. We still haven't explained the specific moment. Understanding the mechanism doesn't yet explain the thing described in the hook, the specific, often startling moment when this recalibration seems to switch on rather than arriving as a smooth, unnoticed gradient. That moment deserves its own explanation, separate from the broader theory. The shift Carstensen's research describes is continuous and gradual at the level of underlying psychological mechanism, but it frequently doesn't feel that way subjectively, because it tends to get triggered into conscious awareness by a specific, identifiable event, rather than dawning slowly on its own. A parent's death, a health scare, your own or someone close to you. A milestone birthday landing at a moment when the arithmetic of remaining years becomes newly impossible to avoid. Half my life is probably over, or worse. These events function as what researchers studying mortality salience, the body of work growing out of terror management theory, describe as reminders that make death, and by extension the finiteness of remaining time, cognitively available in a way it usually isn't during ordinary daily functioning. The underlying shift in time horizon may have been developing gradually for years. The specific triggering event is what makes it cross into conscious, explicit awareness all at once, which is why it so often gets reported as a single moment rather than a slow fade. Even though the theory suggests the underlying recalibration was likely already partway underway before that moment ever arrived. Economists David Blanchflower and Andrew Oswald, in a large body of research spanning data from well over 100 countries and more than 1 million respondents, documented what's become known as the U-bend of happiness, a pattern in which self-reported well-being tends to decline from young adulthood through a low point somewhere in the mid to late 40s before recovering and rising again into older age. Their more recent analyses place the low point on average somewhere around age 47 to 48 in wealthier countries, with a broadly similar pattern showing up across a range of different national data sets. It's worth being direct about something here, since this specific finding has generated real academic disagreement rather than clean consensus. A number of psychologists studying adult development have pushed back on the size and universality of this dip, arguing that in some data sets, the actual magnitude of the midlife low is small, and that calling it a U feels like an overstatement of what's closer to a shallow wobble on an otherwise fairly stable happiness trajectory. The honest state of the research is that a midlife low shows up reliably across many large data sets, but its size and how much of a distinct crisis versus a mild statistical dip it actually represents remains a genuine point of active debate between economists and psychologists studying the same phenomenon from different angles. What isn't seriously disputed is the general shape after that point, whatever its depth. Both Blanchflower and Oswald's economic data and Carstensen's psychological research on emotional experience point in the same direction for what happens afterward, a recovery. And in Carstensen's data specifically, an improvement in emotional regulation and reported positive affect into older age. Once the recalibration described by socioemotional selectivity theory has had time to actually reorganize a person's priorities around what the shorter, clearer horizon has revealed actually matters to them. Psychologist Erik Erikson's stage theory of psychosocial development offers a related complementary framework for what's supposed to happen during this period, one that reframes it as an active developmental task, rather than a passive crisis to survive. Erikson's model describes midlife as centered on a tension between generativity, the drive to contribute to future generations through mentorship, parenting, creative, or civic contribution, work that outlasts you, and stagnation, a state of self-absorption and disconnection from that broader contribution. Successfully navigating this stage in Erikson's framework doesn't mean resolving the anxiety about finite time by ignoring it. It means channeling the new clarity about time's limits into something generative, work and relationships oriented outward, toward a future you may not personally occupy, rather than curling inward around the anxiety itself. This connects directly back to Carstensen's research on shifting time horizons. The narrowing of felt time and the pull toward generativity aren't competing responses to the same realization. They're closely related. Once an open-ended future stops feeling available, investing directly in things that outlast your own remaining time, in Erikson's framework, becomes one of the more psychologically coherent responses available, a way of extending meaning and relevance past a horizon that has just become newly uncomfortably visible. What actually changes afterward? Put together, the research suggests a fairly specific set of behavioral shifts follow this moment of recalibration, once it's actually metabolized rather than resisted. Time and attention shift measurably away from expanding social breadth, acquiring new acquaintances, chasing status markers with long, uncertain payoff horizons, and toward deepening a smaller number of already important relationships and pursuits. This isn't, per Carstensen's research, a narrowing driven by decline or disengagement. It's a reallocation driven by a much more accurate accounting of where a finite resource is actually best spent, once the resource has revealed itself, often for the first time, to genuinely be finite. So if you're approaching this moment or already somewhere inside it, the useful reframe the research actually offers isn't that the anxiety is misplaced or that it should be argued away. It's that the anxiety is doing a specific identifiable job, making a previously abstract fact that time was never actually unlimited concrete enough to finally be worked with, rather than quietly ignored. What Carstensen's research, Erikson's framework, and even the contested happiness data converge on is a shared conclusion worth sitting with directly. The moment doesn't arrive to tell you that less time is left than you assumed. You already knew that abstractly the whole time. It arrives to ask what you're finally going to do, now that the number has stopped feeling abstract.